Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Conversations at the Royal. Thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening. We really appreciate it. Whether or not you celebrate Christmas, it's always a very stressful and busy time of year, so we appreciate you taking the time to be here. The topic for the talk tonight is When Mental Illness Leads to Crime, Stigma and Recovery for the Forensic Client. The reason why we chose this topic is because we believe it is essential to address stigma in order to promote recovery. Otherwise, there's a big barrier. Our objectives are to cover the following: what it means to be a forensic client or to be found not criminally responsible, or NCR, the difference between NCR and antisocial or psychopathy, how stigma develops in a society, the double stigma attached to the label forensic client, the impact for the family, and what to do to decrease stigma, promote recovery, and successful community reintegration. We are thrilled to have Shawn and Francis, two of our clients, here this evening to share their journey with us. You will have the pleasure of meeting them later. Joining me for this presentation is Dr. Annick Gosselin. Dr. Gosselin is a psychologist registered for independent practice in neuropsychology, clinical psychology, and forensic psychology, and a clinical professor at the University of Ottawa. She is a full-time psychologist at the Forensic Treatment Unit of the Brockville Mental Health Centre, working with individuals diagnosed with severe mental illnesses such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and borderline personality disorder. She does both clinical and research work. In addition to conducting neuropsychological assessments, her main therapeutic approaches are CBT for psychosis, dialectic behavior therapy, emotion-focused therapy, and she also has extensive experience with post-traumatic stress disorder. Helping people with severe mental illness who end up in the forensic system is a passion, as she finds they often have little access to therapeutic support despite the severity of their illness, and tend to have very difficult and often traumatic past histories. Also joining me this evening is Rafaela Fleischer. Rafaela is a social worker in the forensic program as well at the Royal here in Ottawa, with clinical responsibilities for the outpatients who are transitioning to the community. She also provides CBT counseling in groups and on an individual basis. She has over 30 years of clinical experience working in the areas of mental health, addictions, and child protection. She received her Master in Social Work training from McGill University and has received advanced supervised clinical training and holds a certificate from the Bach Institute in clinical supervision.
And let me introduce you to Diane Hoffman-Lacombe. I'm very pleased to introduce her because I first met her as my supervisor during my supervised practice years, and she remains a mentor to me to this day. So Diane obtained her master's in clinical psychology from the University of Ottawa. She's a clinical and forensic psychologist and has worked at the Royal Forensic Treatment Unit, Ottawa, for 35 years. She knows what she's talking about. She engages in the provision of psychological services for inpatients and outpatients, in particular individual and group CBT for psychosis. Diane is a founding member of the Canadian Association of Cognitive Behavior Therapy and has completed CBT training at the Beck Institute for Cognitive Behavior Therapy. We have decided to start our evening with a clip of a documentary movie that was done recently The story goes that a couple of years ago, Mr. John Kastner and his crew approached both staff and patients at the Brockville Mental Health Center, hoping to produce a film that would strive to destigmatize the forensic clientele. At that time, very few people wanted to take part in such a project. In the past, the media had usually done nothing but damage the public's perception of our patients in the forensic system. Usually, the media portrays an image of dangerousness and creates fear rather than educating the public on mental illness. Since Mr. Kastner produced not one but 2 movies, and he also won many prizes for his pioneer role in destigmatizing the forensic clientele. Tonight, we will present sections of the 2 movies to promote our understanding of the forensic reality interspersed in between our presentations. The first 2 sections will show that we will show you are from the first movie, NCR, Not Criminally Responsible, depicting the story of Shawn Clifton, and the third section is from the movie Out of Mind, Out of Sight, depicting the story of Michael Stewart and his family. We encourage you to see both movies in full. They are truly worth seeing.
He looked like a very passive type person, like he living in his own world. He had long hair. He had a nickname that people said used to call him as Jesus Christ. There had to be something wrong with him, but I never thought he would resort to that kind of violence, this individual. And then that night to see him do what he did, it just kind of blew me away. I just couldn't believe it. I said, gee, I never thought a person like that could do a thing like this.
Police got a call at approximately 7:45 p.m. on night, indicating that a woman was being stabbed in front of Walmart at 950 Brookdale Avenue. His victim was a 22-year-old female who was a resident of the city of Cornwall. She was a young lady who was about to get married in the very near future.
We knew it was a complete random act of violence. It was just, she was not known to him. He had never seen her before. The devil told him to stab the prettiest girl that he's seen. When we walked in, I She was covered with, all I remember was she was covered with a white sheet that was completely soaked in the reddest color of blood I've ever seen.
We didn't know how many times she'd been stabbed. No.
So when you arrived at the hospital initially, you didn't know if she was going to live or die?
No.
That's right.
No.
Shawn Clifton was someone who was known to almost all police officers because of his contact that we've had with him in the community. And what I mean by that is that often we would find him acting in a bizarre manner in a public place. Routinely we'd come across him and we'd see he was in a distorted state or a delusional state, but not in a violent manner. But this particular event was a total surprise. This is not something I would have predicted from him.
And I had maybe a minute with my daughter, with Julie. I took my two hands, that's about the only place I could touch her. I put my two hands under Julie's head and I kissed her. And I went into her ear and I says, Mom and Dad's here. You're going in surgery, you're gonna be all right. The strength I felt, it's unbelievable. And all she did was a little nod saying she understood. So I think she was conscious, in pain, and I pulled my hands, walked out of the room, and I lost it.
And I've looked into your background and I know of you, okay?
Within 2 hours of the incident occurring at Walmart, I had occasion to interview Shawn Clifton in an attempt to try and understand how such a horrific event could occur.
There's one thing that I'm getting at that I'm not quite sure about, okay? And it's the why. Why would a nice guy like you and then do something like that? Seems so unattractive.
When they started the surgery, one nurse kept coming out and telling us, okay, so far so good, and then they come out and a lung had collapsed. Then they came out and said we had to put a chest tube in, and like it kept getting worse and worse. It's devastating. You feel so helpless, you know.
One of the memories that I'll be back.
When the police arrived on scene, the perpetrator, Shawn Clifton, in this case, was still there. He was still standing there. He wasn't trying to avoid detection or flee from the police, and that he was standing there. And what was interesting was the fact that when the officers approached him, he was like in a trance. He was just staring.
Why all of a sudden out of the blue and that you lose control and this happened to them? Do you think that needs an explanation right now? You seem to be upset by it. No. It's eating out. It seems to be eating away at you. Yeah, it's sort of. You feel bad? It wasn't. Maybe. I'm not sure.
The psychiatrist in the case felt that he did not have the operating mind in order to form mens rea, and in other words, an intentional will to commit a crime. And as a result, he was sent to a forensic psychiatric facility, the Brockville Mental Health Center.
So in terms of background, the next slides provide a brief overview and general information about the forensic program and about being found NCR. The integrated forensic program has a broad mandate, and basically it is to provide specialized services in assessment, treatment, rehabilitation, and community reintegration to persons with mental illness who have come into conflict with the criminal justice system. So it's really the coming together of the two systems, mental health and criminal justice, within a safe, therapeutic, and recovery-oriented environment. Our approach is interdisciplinary. We have all the disciplines represented on the team: psychiatry, nursing, psychology, social work, occupational therapy, recreology, vocational counselors, etc. I don't want to forget anyone. It's a big team. We have orderlies as well. The forensic program operates out of 3 sites. The Forensic Treatment Unit here in Ottawa, Forensic Treatment Unit in Brockville, and this will be the focus of what we'll be talking about tonight. And there's also the Secure Treatment Unit in Brockville, which is a correctional facility. It's like a hospital inside a jail, and we won't be talking about that tonight. Services are varied, so the NCR group is only one part of what we do. We have secure assessment inpatient beds, 24 beds, 81 secure rehab and transition inpatient beds, and this is both Brockville and Ottawa. We also have 4 secure mental health beds, which are 2 reserved for residents from the Yukon and 2 for federal inmates. And we have a variety of outpatient services, approximately 1,500, it's probably closer to 1,600 altogether. We have the ORB clients that are outpatients, and we have transitional housing and intensive, like an ACT team working with them. We have a brief assessment unit which does out-of-custody assessments, and the general forensic clinic, which includes general outpatients, people on probation, for example, and the Chrysalis Day program. We also have mental health court and mental health court clinic to do triage right at the courthouse. That's done by psychiatrists. And psychiatrists also go to the Ottawa Carleton Detention Center 3 times a week. We also have specialized clinics, sexual behaviors, anger disorders, and family court clinic. So in terms of court-ordered assessments and Ontario Review Board clients, this is what the numbers look like for this year, and I got the numbers maybe a month ago. So in custody and out of custody fitness assessments, 48. In custody and out of custody NCR assessments, 80. We have right now 201 NCR clients. Of those, 191 are NCR and 10 are unfit to stand trial. 81 are inpatients and 120 are outpatients. So this relates directly to finding of NCR. It's a quote out of the Criminal Code of Canada. So it's section 16 that deals with the NCR finding. So defense of mental disorder. No person is criminally responsible for an act committed or an omission made while suffering from a mental disorder that rendered the person incapable of appreciating the nature and quality of the act or omission of, or of knowing that it was wrong. So basically, is that a person committed a crime, the person was suffering from a mental disorder, and the mental disorder was a factor at the time of the crime. So the person, either that the person was not able to appreciate the nature and quality of the action, so to know what they were doing or what the consequences of the actions would be, or not knowing that it was wrong in the legal and moral sense. So usually people that are found NCR have a diagnosis of severe mental illness like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, for example, psychotic disorders. So the big difference with an antisocial personality disorder, and sometimes that people misunderstand, the antisocial personality disorder is a long-standing, lifelong pattern of disregard for and violation of rights of others. So we're talking about personality features and behaviors that are antisocial. We're not talking about someone who's psychotic. You may also have heard of the construct of psychopathy. Psychopathy is defined by personality traits and behaviors, and there's usually 4 areas that are looked at: interpersonal, affective, lifestyle, and antisocial. So you see that antisocial is 1 out of 4. So a lot of the people that are in jail have antisocial personality disorder, and some of those may have psychopathic traits. People that have psychopathic traits probably have antisocial personality disorders. But that's very different from someone who suffers from schizophrenia or bipolar disorder and who becomes a psychotic and commits an offense. So people that have antisocial personality disorder or psychopathic traits are able to appreciate the nature and quality of their actions. They know that it was wrong legally and morally. They're not psychotic. They don't lose contact with reality. And as you'll see maybe later in the movie clip, they have a choice of action. So their actions are not driven by the illness, whereas person who's found in NCR, very often they felt that the actions were driven by the illness itself. Okay, now I was going to show you a couple of clips from the movie NCR. So clip number 2 is a section of the movie that highlights how impairing Shawn's illness was.
He was very seclusive when he came in. He didn't interact with anyone that he didn't absolutely have to. He would sit in a common area, but not where other people are sitting.
Shawn was so tormented and preoccupied with what was going on in his mind that the world outside of his mind didn't exist. And he didn't care about it because he was so bombarded with thoughts and impulses and rituals that, you know, if you spoke to him, he'd look right at you, but he's not hearing you because he is inside his mind.
Well, of course, with schizophrenia, he was very, very paranoid. But the most striking thing about him at that time was his obsessive-compulsive disorder. In my years here, he had the worst case of obsessive-compulsive disorder that I've ever witnessed. He'd had several rituals. The one that sticks most in my mind would be at meal times. Shawn would have to put that tray back, and then he would have to adjust it 5 or 10 or 15 times. But he would not be able to complete his meal and leave the dining area until that ritual had been completed.
If you disturbed him in a conversation, if you tried to interject your opinion or get him to elaborate, he would stop what he was saying and start from the beginning again.
Yes, at a certain time, yes, he was one of the illest individuals we've had through.
So the next section is important to highlight how Shawn, with help, worked at his recovery.
I had to watch the seconds on the clock for 10 or 15, 20 minutes before I could leave the TV room and stuff like that. I think I just got so frustrated and so tired and fed up, I just found the strength to just kind of gently, carefully leave the TV watching room. And with every day, I got a little more frustrated and fed up and started to just, I guess I still felt afraid, but I went ahead and stepped on cigarette butts on the sidewalk and all those things I was afraid to do for 4 or 5 years.
He's worked very hard
Yes.
himself.
Yeah.
Very
There has
hard.
been an amazing transformation in the gentleman.
All set? Okay, have a good day.
You too, Mark.
No problem.
There's been a psychiatric institution in this community for over 100 years. You can go into a local restaurant or a mall and you'll see maybe every 15 or 20 minutes somebody will walk by mumbling to themselves or displaying some sort of behavior that, again, it's not within the norm.
Hi, how are you today?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. What can I get you today?
Can I please have a medium coffee?
Yeah.
And
What would you like in it?
double cream, please.
Okay. Is that everything?
Yeah.
They're just accepted as that's part of the community. I've never seen them overtly or in your face people abusing people in this community that are different.
Do you have family here?
No, I've got family sort of spread out through southeastern Ontario, like in. And I told her what was going on. That they were making a documentary on recovery from mental illness and things like that.
Yeah. Well, things will work. So they got you on the right medication. It's doing what it's supposed to do.
It's doing its thing. It's
Good.
kind of getting me on the path to reality.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you were very open about the fact with a complete stranger that you had a mental illness.
Yeah, I was. No sense trying to hide it.
How did she respond?
Positively.
What's your name?
Shawn Clifton.
Shawn Clifton.
I'm just a guy from the psych who's starring in a documentary.
She asked me for my autograph, so I graciously obliged her and signed an autograph for her. She'd have talked to me another 5 or 10 minutes, I think, if I would have had something to say.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
That's really good.
Morning, Wayne.
Morning, Shawn. How are you this morning?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good, thank you.
I like my freedom and, well, like I said, it'd be nice to be a regular guy again. I'm not gonna say I want to put the crazy period in the past and just forget about it. It's really been an education and it'll be food for thought for a long time. I guess I'd like to have my sanity back.
This is a very brief overview of an excellent movie. I cannot stress enough how I encourage you to seek out to see it in full. It's done by the National Film Board. What I want to talk to you today is about stigma, and particularly the stigma of mental illness. So I don't know if you see my little cartoon I'll read a few with you. So here you see a person who's like very sick in bed with a thermometer. I get that you have food poisoning and all, but you have to at least make an effort. This person cut his hand. You just need to change your frame of mind, then you'll feel better. And then here we have you tried, not having the flu? So people who battle mental illness often receive comments that can be felt very similar to this, but unfortunately mental illness is an invisible wound. So we don't see a hand cut, we don't see, so people tend to not have a good grasp of mental illness as a result. One major societal challenge to recovery from mental illness is stigma. And unfortunately, stigma often results in self-stigma for the person. In the forensic system, the stigma is even double because our clients also committed offenses while ill, and the public tends to be afraid of them. What is stigma? Socially discrediting attribute, behavior, reputation. Negative attitude held by the public about people with devalued characteristics. There are research on the topic. Thankfully, it's useful to understand why do we have stigma? Because we all know it exists. It's for a lot of different characteristics, human characteristics. You'll have a group of rejected people. So apparently there's 3 different types of functions for stigma. The exploitation domination, where basically some groups must have less power in order for other groups, the dominant group, to have more. Slavery is the typical example of that, but prejudice against women in the olden days, in here anyways, is another example. There's another function which is enforcement of social norms. So think of smoking. You want the deviant people to conform to the group. So this one applies only to behavior that the group identified as perceived as voluntary for the person. So obesity would be another example. Smoking definitely is the typical example for that one. There is also another function which would be evolution. I have a hard time saying this word. Evolutionary purpose. Sorry. This is a pressure that based in the evolution to keep defective people, disabled, defective in bracket, apart. So the group, the majority, rather stay away just in case. So think of handicaps, blindness, AIDS in the olden days, and mental illness definitely fall in this category. So stigma, we know, create self-stigma, which is the internalization of the stereotypes held by the group. that the person has. And again, there is research done on the topic, and what we know happens is there's different progressive steps to become, start stigmatizing oneself. So first of all, you have the awareness piece. So, for example, the public believe people with mental illness are weak. So people believe people with mental illness are weak. Then there will be a phase of agreement. That's right. People with mental illness are weak. Then there's the application. I am mentally ill, so I must be weak. And finally, and it's very sad, there's the harm. Because I am weak, I am not worthy, I am not able. So it creates a phenomenon called the why try effect. So literally, the person gives up trying. So, for example, trying to hold a job, trying to have friends, trying to get help because it's not going to change anything, right? I'm defective. I'm not worthy. I am beyond help. Unfortunately, this creates exactly the contrary to what a healthy society would want, which is to have a healthy and productive society that takes care of their people and make them better. So this slide is just to highlight that the why try effect is a known effect that ultimately, because of that, start with the public stigma. The stigma is internalized through stereotypes, well, the self-stigma and the mediators, such as poor self-esteem, poor self-efficacy. So what it creates literally is the person doesn't get and doesn't do healthy behavior to get better. Literally doesn't go to treatment, doesn't participate, and doesn't seek help. So there's a lot of effects of stigma: depression, shame, social avoidance. These are all very well researched areas. Distancing. So the people isolate themselves. Increase in symptom intensity. Like, this is really not what we want how to treat people with mental illness in our society. Increase in hospitalization. Decrease in hope and in quality of life, decrease in treatment adherence, of course, poor self-esteem and self-efficacy. In forensic, of course, we have an additional challenge to recovery. The forensic label is considered a double stigma. I am violent and mentally ill. I scare people. I'm not worthy of love. I have to hide. It's an extra challenge for the healthcare providers because trust is more difficult to build due to the forensic system as well. There's a loss of freedom, and so often the treatments are kind of very strongly encouraged. There's a lot of learned helplessness due to the double stigma, so it's difficult to engage the people in treatment, people with mental health issues in forensic. There's once they're ready to go back to the community, they're treated. Housing difficulties come up. People don't necessarily want to, so landlords won't necessarily want to lease their apartment to somebody with the forensic label. Which if there's landlords here, I just want to advocate for our clients, because I tell you, they're actually the best tenants you can have. They're in bed at 9 o'clock, they don't drink, the rent is paid every month, they're quiet, they're great. So I hope there's like landlords here who can, open their door. How do we fight stigma? Policy and law changes. It works, and this is where it starts. Example, making discrimination illegal. Also general policy, like think of smoking, like 40 years ago, everybody here would be smoking with their little ashtray beside themselves and we couldn't see the presentations. Now it would be impossible to imagine such a thing. It started with the law. The research first though, but then the law change and the policy change. Decrease ignorance. Often, like a movie like tonight, it decreases ignorance because people have a preconceived idea. We imagine something, we see something in the newspaper, and we imagine a monstrous type of image, and often this is far from the case, from being the case. A shift from the medical model to recovery model. This is something that has been changing slowly. This is in the policy and law changes areas, but it's changing in the hospital settings as well. So focusing more on a system that provides hope, dignity, that doesn't focus necessarily in finding a cure, but more in managing symptoms, living. We can be a participant in the public life. We can be a full member of society and have symptoms that are manageable. So the goal is to include the person in their treatment instead of talking about the person who had the mental health issues. Including peer support workers is another way to fight stigma within the treatment teams. So because it provides the view of a person who had to go through this system, that sometimes when people are rushed, they forget. So these are different ways. So there's also changed societal attitudes at the national level, and recently, and it's I'm very proud of what Canada has been doing, because with the Mental Health Commission of Canada, they recently published guidelines for recovery-oriented practices. It's available for free online. Overall, the idea is that hope is at the core of recovery. There's no recovery without hope. So creating hope is major. Recovery is personal. First of all, include the person in their treatment. They decide. Not one person is the same as the other. We have big label, big diagnoses, but one person with schizophrenia is very different than the other next door. Recovery occurs in the context of one's life. It doesn't occur at the hospital. It occurs in the community. It occurs at work, in the workplace. It occurs within our family. It occurs within our cultural system. So these are these guidelines, including everybody, not just the main group, people like gay people, Inuit people, elderlies, youth. Everybody have the right to have their needs met. So it's about transforming services and systems, and it takes time. So that's the gist of it. It's good, and it's bringing up change. Now, it's important to understand that stigma, so it happens at the societal level. It's a societal problem. So it's not the problem of the person with the self-stigma, but there are techniques or strategies that help fight stigma. And we saw one tonight with the movie, but basically the more you disclose within everybody's level of comfort, of course, the more you fight the stigma. So there's steps, there's social avoidance, where the person completely isolate, secrecy, where the person will go in the community but not tell anybody, selective disclosure, where they start to talk a bit to certain people, indiscriminate disclosure, everybody knows, and finally broadcast, you participate in a movie. So that's all I had to say to you. The only thing, the take-home message for from me to you tonight is, please fight stigma, because stigma ultimately hurts everybody. Thank you.
Hello. In the previous presentation, we were focusing on the individual, and now I'm going to focus mostly on the caregiver, or also the family member. So for the purpose of this presentation, I wanted to just emphasize what I mean, or just describe what caregiver means. I'm referring to a spouse, mother, father, husband, wife, child, I guess close friend or relative. And I also will be talking about caregivers' feelings and experiences and how we could further support and help. There's ongoing stress in caring for a family member with mental illness. The caregiver carries a significant amount of emotional turmoil, as well as feelings of being trapped and not knowing what to do. This places a lot of stress on the caregiver. In the literature, violence was the behavioral problem most reported. Despite clear signs of danger, some parents remain protective of their loved ones with a mental health problem, as they experience a lot of stress and guilt regarding seeking help. In a review of the literature, the caregivers were often the victim of patients offending. Mothers of their loved one were more at risk. This may be because mothers, they tend to stay with family members and children. They don't give up as fast. And despite feeling difficult or experiencing difficult or violent behavior, caregivers are more at risk of being harmed by a family member than the general public, despite the general public's perception. There's limited literature about the experiences of caregivers who find themselves in this position. Their loved ones are doubly disadvantaged in the eyes of the public because they are perceived as both mentally ill, a criminal, and unpredictable. This further exacerbates existing stigma. Families find the violent behavior of their loved ones and the stigmatization of people with a mental illness by the public and the media very burdensome and shaming. One study found that common stress among caregivers of forensic patients focused on experiences with the media and legal proceedings. And they found the behavior of the media actually even more difficult than the courts, dealing with the courts or even with police. The most distress was reported about around the very public outing of the patient and the family. Sensationalized media coverage of the criminal acts committed by the patients and the patients and the shaming of their patient and the family were always very challenging. Caregivers of the forensic patient are often deemed guilty by association, often leading to ostracism, abuse, and sometimes physical violence. Exposure of the caregivers and their loved ones in newspapers, particularly when accompanied by a picture, were a source of shame and suffering for a lot of the families. And their sense of stigma was more acute. Dealing with the media was not in most people's skill repertoire. And they wouldn't predict that they would actually have to ever deal with this kind of thing. As one parent described, there is a history, a pattern. It doesn't just happen overnight. No one knows that. Now, I'm going to be focusing on how we can help families. Excuse me. Wasn't finished. An independent study of forensic mental health services, and as I was mentioning, there really is not a lot of data on this, but the ones that I did find were the most amount of information was in Scotland or in the UK in particular. So this, in a forensic facility in Scotland, an issue that emerged was the attitude of caregivers' neighbors. A crime of violence committed by a close loved one is not the sort of thing that anyone would wish others to know about. Another issue was caregivers' lack of informal support network. So often, some lost friends and also felt ostracized and distant from their community. Social and medical services. Many caregivers tried for many years to seek services and had to deal with very extraordinary difficult behavior on the part and received very little support. Often they weren't knowledgeable about available services, and if they knew about them, they were uncertain how to access them. When the crime was a homicide, it caused a breakup of the family unit. This was very difficult for family members because there was a change in the family unit, and the caregiver were left to deal with the loss of not only a family member, but also trying to keep the family together. So this change may affect the caregiver's confidence. This would lead to lack of confidence or concern about their ability to be able to care for their loved one. And I guess the other part is that they're trying to figure out, how can I go on with my future? How is this changing my whole family? So as a result, many of them were having difficulties when family members were discharged into the community. So now I'm going to be referring to how we can help families. Firstly, we can continue to do what Anik was saying, an integrated care approach, which involves clinicians, service providers, family members, and to clearly define roles and responsibilities to help the loved one or their family member in dealing with this huge change. Another is to provide counseling services to the caregivers, either face-to-face or by telephone or other ways. And information about services being available to caregivers, whether it's about their loved one being in a forensic facility and what to expect. Caregivers of forensic patients have special needs, and which are not often adequately helped in traditional family groups. And what's important is that they're very different. So the support is a different type of group. So self-help groups and family support groups would be geared to the forensic family members. So recent attention has been paid to the needs of the family caregivers in performing the tasks of caring. Obviously, helping caregivers strengthens their capacity to care and cope, and therefore directly affects their loved one. Recognizing that caregivers of forensic patients have needs of their own that are separate from those of their loved one would lead to greater resources available. One of the issues that may be present is that caregivers often have difficulty approaching service providers. Maybe they're not available. The access is not as quick as they need it. And many of them are ashamed to ask, unaware service is available, or deny the problem. Or perhaps they're fearful of the consequences of their actions. How can our society reduce the impact of stigma? Education and contact with the stigmatized groups are two commonly discussed methods of changing stigma at the societal level. Researchers have discussed increasing efforts to use the media to decrease public stigma. There is increasing push for early treatment of family members or individuals with mental illness, which is only possible if people are willing to seek out the services and accept treatment at an early course of their illness. So the next clip that I have is a list of all the different types of services that are available. Now, this is just one page. There's quite an extensive list, and I actually provided a list of the resources that, if you're interested, it's about 4 pages of services that we would be able to provide or just give some information. At the hospital, we do provide a group coping with mental illness, and we provide a lot of different services, like some information sessions on different specific illnesses and for family members. And I'm actually one of the co-leaders of that too. So I have found that extremely helpful in even putting this together. So, so I just wanted to show the next clip, the movie clip, specifically about how to sort of illustrate many of the points I discussed about family members or caregivers. So this is a clip from a movie, Out of Mind, Out of Sight, the history of Michael Stewart and his family. They suffered the terrible loss of Michael's mother due to his illness.
You all love and support Michael?
Unreservedly.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
But and now it's turned to the fact that I've come to realize that my immediate family are my they're for some unknown reason they've stuck by me. So
The question of how we could forgive someone like Michael is a classic example of blaming the victim. Seems like such an obvious analogy, but you don't forgive someone for contracting their cancer. Mom, unfortunately, lost her life, but it's important to keep in mind that there are 2 victims in this story, and one of them happens to still be suffering. Michael survived the terrible event, but he continues to suffer.
it seemed like the positive memories and the negative memories both caused me pain. Because look what I've done. I've impacted so many, I've impacted this network of people.
I think that with the loss of a loved one, with an act of unthinkable violence such as this, our instinct is to look for the fault, look for the cause of it. But we make a terrible mistake to think that cause rests with Michael himself. The cause of this tragedy is a mental disease. It's a mistake to say that Michael was himself her killer. I mean, her killer was schizophrenia. The cause of her death was this disease.
I'm not able to grieve the way I'd like to. I have some grief, but it's not a feel-good grief, which I imagine, because from what I know, some people grieve loved ones with fond memories, whereas I'm not. I'll just say this. I'm grieving, it's like if I grieve, unless there are odd moments that contradict this, or not odd, but spare, occasional moments that contradict this, but for the most part, I grieve alone.
So I would just like to say that, just listening to that, it's the story, even the story of some family members and individuals that we want to make sure people understood that there is a story behind everyone's situation, and just to be sensitive to that too. So for the next part, very lucky of all of us, I just wanted to introduce Frances Laveau. I'm just going to give you a really quick review, who will be reciting 3 poems. Mr. Laveau graduated from the University of Ottawa with a Bachelor in General Arts and was a hard-working student. He also played at the university on the university football team. He had high aspirations until he got sidetracked with his mental illness. Although the sports door, his interest in sports and his playing football closed, other doors opened, such as poetry and writing. He is on a creative journey. So I'd like to introduce Frances.
Hey guys, how you doing? It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Once again, whenever I have something to do with the hospital, I always get something out of it. Good lessons, good information, good quality people that make me feel comfortable about myself and being me. I'm glad that you guys made it out tonight. I'd like to recite 3 poems for you guys. This first one I don't know by heart, so I'm gonna have to cheat a little bit and look at my cell phone. I call this one Decisions. Decisions, decisions, decisions. One of the things we all have in common. We make them often, hoping to choose the best option. From what we do to where we go, we make choices all along the way, to and fro. Be wary though, making the wrong choices can take its toll. Thus one should know, you reap what you sow. Then how you approach the daily rigmarole that's under your control can lead to despair or delight. The moral compass foresight predicts what choices are wrong and right. And what you choose to choose between morning and night can improve your mood or put you in spite. But some decisions have both negative and positive outcomes alike. These dilemmas and win-win situations are better governed with anticipation through the process of elimination. Choices, taken slowly or without hesitation, complex in product, yet simple in factors, one gains experience after every consideration. Such inclinations reflect who we are, and though similar goals abide, we're all individuals by far. Thank you. All right, the second one I call Poetry in Motion. Here we go. Elegant visions and sounds abound. Just look and listen as you are so easily found. From the sight of the red cardinal as it soars, to the tapping of women's high heel shoes as they hit the floor. Colors provide vivid variety that add accent to your society. Auditory cues and sight clues as of how to react to what is around you. Colors and sounds intertwine, but they can never combine. Colors can be heard and sounds can't be seen, but both make lifeless scenes expressed through dreams. Thank you. And the last one, it's called Passion. Now this applies to whatever your meaningful activities, your core values, things that you do that give you an extra lift throughout the day. It goes, passion grips your senses, pushing you forward with determined incentive. The present practice pursued, so near and dear to you, produces pleasuresome sensations so true and true. As feelings of joy rush throughout your body, you find meaning and delight being just right when you experience your favorite hobby. Captivate for hours upon end, and although it challenges you through and through, over and over again, the return of satisfaction reminds you of the true meaning of passion. Thank you.